For over 300 years, there was fighting in South Africa. Wars after wars after wars of resistance.
I was now coming face to face with the person who was responsible for Lindy's death.
For a long time, I had demonized the people I was fighting against.
I had this perception of an evil person.
For the first time, I met someone whose daughter died as a result of my command.
How does one move from victimhood to survivor and then to wounded healer? I can only speak from my own experience. That experience of forgiveness sparks me to share the story, and I think Letlapa as well.
Storytelling is part of a healing process. It's a catharsis. We are talking about 10 million rents, and some offenders are facing... My name is Letlapa Mphahlele. I am an active politician. I am a member of the PAC, and I'm also representing PAC in the National Assembly of South Africa in Parliament.
I'm Jen Fourie, and I'm married with a son. We had 2 children, but Lindy was killed in 1993. I taught physiotherapy for 18 years at the University of Cape Town and took early retirement in 2003 in order to spend time with the vision of the Lindy Fourie Foundation.
The President of PAC, Honorable President Mphahlele Award.
Well, we gain freedom, but economic freedom eludes us.
In the past, I was a freedom fighter. I spent some time in exile, and I rose through the ranks of ABLA, Azanian People's Liberation Army, until I became its Director of Operations. It was clear that the state was oppressive. There was fighting in this country. Political parties that had a different opinion to what the regime was holding were banned, were outlawed. I thought that one should be organized and fight the oppression. On the 6th of November 1993, 5 school children were killed by South African Defence Force, and that angered me deeply. And the president of South Africa at the time, F.W. de Klerk, he said those people were ABLA operatives. Against that background of killing of school children, much as we had said no more civilian targets, I felt that something very dramatic had to be done.
The armed attack on a restaurant in Cape Town, in which 4 people died and 5 were injured, has been widely condemned both here and abroad.
The Heidelberg Tavern case was probably the worst case so far of killers saying they merely followed orders.
Because we were told the Heidelberg Tavern is one of the targets that must be hit because it was frequently by the security branch members. So that's how the order came. We were to kill and destroy. So we were shooting just randomly. We were not aiming to the targets.
it was a thing that was necessary to show anyone that never again African people would be murdered with impunity.
We'd been out for the day with friends on the wine route in the Western Cape. We got back at about 4, and a friend of ours was parked in the driveway. And she said, "Jen, let's go upstairs and sit." So I said, "Why?" She said, "Because I have news." And I said, "It's Lindy, isn't it? She's dead. Because otherwise you'd be rushing me to hospital." And that was intuitive. As a young girl, she was always very interested in what was happening. She would want to know all about what was going on. So she would ask very mature questions for a little girl. She really had an empathic heart. She could enter into the life of the person. It's hard to believe until you see her body lying on a cold grey slab. And there's no last words, there's no communication. And you want to take her home. Difficult to describe, numbness. The anger comes later. I was immobilized. And I howled every day, many times a day. Which gradually became less and less over a year. The injustice of Lindy dying, so was that God's fault? No, it wasn't God's fault. It was the people who pulled the trigger. That was their decision. And not knowing who they were was what caused the anger. I was aware of who Letlapa was from the time of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
This witness was prepared
And
to
that
overlook
was in 97.
and come to terms with the reality.
The people who were directly involved with planning this whole thing and getting these gentlemen to execute the orders, they're the people that we want to know about.
The TRC doesn't encourage people to speak truth. And I dare say this whole farce, this whole circus is doomed for failure. You cannot reconcile the dispossessed and the dispossessor. You cannot reconcile the oppressor and the oppressed.
I turned on the radio in my car in 2002 and heard that he was having a press club meeting about his book, Child of the Soil, and they were interviewing him. So I made sure that I got there.
My publisher warned me before the launch started that there will be relatives and actually even survivors of APLA attacks. So I should brace myself for a tough time.
I felt very tense because I was now coming face to face with the person who was responsible for Lindy's death. The others had done the action, but weren't the mastermind. The press started hounding him. The question was, why did he carry on after the decision for free and fair elections had been put in place? He defended by saying that he had given a ceasefire order, but then young people had been killed in Mthatha. So then he decided to unleash all the anger that he felt towards white people. So he took personal responsibility, which was very rare and which hadn't happened with the South African Defence Force. Their generals were still trying to skirt the issues, and so they didn't know and weren't responsible for all the atrocities that happened. And so I started developing some admiration for him in terms of his honesty and integrity.
It was for the first time really I met someone whose daughter, and only daughter for that matter, had died as a result of ABLA operations, which took place as a result of my command. So it was a bit unnerving, unsettling.
But when I stood up to identify who I was, and that Lindy had died at the Heidelberg Tavern, and asked him if he hadn't trivialized the Truth and Reconciliation, he said, well, you could see it that way. But from my perspective, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission trivialized the fact that we were at war. So that kind of pulled the rug out under my feet. I'd had the same questions.
Much as, I tried to answer that question, but I think there was an unanswered question beneath that question, and that question was not going to be answered there and then. I approached her and asked her whether it was possible that we could meet, away from the inquisitive lenses of cameras. And we agreed that we would be meeting in Parliament in Cape Town. And as we were approaching the entrance, she looked me in the eye and asked me whether I believed in God.
He sort of hesitated, and then he said, no, he has to be honest, he's an atheist.
I felt that it is better really maybe to head her once more instead of heading her with lies. And she asked the second question, whether I believed in spirituality.
He said yes, he's spiritual. Everybody has a spiritual component to their being.
I think spirituality is something exists whether one believes or whether one doesn't believe. And I believe that every human being has a spiritual dimension.
I said, well, that's enough for me.
And she said, in spite of the pain that you caused me, I forgive you. No, it was like being struck by lightning out of the blue. No, in a cloudless day, a lightning strikes you. It was something that I was never prepared for.
I had this perception of anyone who could perpetrate such a deed as an evil person. And then when I met him, to see his integrity and his humility, so then there was no way I could shut him out.
It was like an opening of life, another window of life, because for a long time I had demonized the people I was fighting against. But when people were reaching out and even agreeing to a meeting with me, it was like an opening of a world that was until then closed to me.
I made a conscious decision and a principled decision to give up my justifiable right to revenge. It's not something that one does without thought. And forgiveness is part of the process of moving from victimhood, because as one takes this principled decision to give up your right to revenge, and start seeing the humanity in the person who's committed or perpetrated against you. You no longer feel as though the wound is just yours. You start seeing the woundedness of the other.
As she delivered that great gift of forgiveness, immediately I knew that there was something weighing heavily on my shoulders. And that something was, how do I reciprocate? There was going to be official welcome to my people in my village. And it was just a small thank you to her, an invitation that she should be there.
And he asked me if I would speak at his homecoming ceremony for 10 minutes. So then I struggled with what to say. Guess it was some anxiety about saying the right thing. There were close to 2,000 black people and probably 8 white people.
When Jin spoke, you could hear a pin drop. Yeah. Everything was absolutely quiet as people listened, and that was very moving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I told them that I'd spoken to my ancestors to know why we were in the situation that we're in South Africa, and that they were deeply sorry for the hurt and pain that they had caused through slavery, through colonialism, through the Anglo-Boer War and then apartheid. Because for me, the Anglo-Boer War was directly related to apartheid. The response was enormous. The cheering and the kudu horn was blown, and people just made their resonance of what I'd said known. And at the end, the woman came and cried on my shoulder. And one young man came and he said, "Please have a picture taken with me, because in my village, no one will believe that there's a white woman who understands."
She has done something that few people have done, but with no motives, because she went on to ask forgiveness from my people for colonialism, apartheid, slavery, etc., without any political posturing. South Africa is suffering from soul sickness. We are not a normal society in many respects. We have not taken the exercise of healing to its logical conclusion. So in one of my visits to Cape Town, where we had agreed that we would meet before I left Cape Town, she said she had conjured up an idea, and that idea was of a foundation.
The Lindy Fourie Foundation is intended to bring healing and conciliation in South Africa.
Storytelling is part of a healing process. You release, you share something verbally. It's a catharsis. The object of being here today attempt to heal the communities. And there is a community of the Sans and Khoi. They were used as trackers in Angola, Namibia, even here in South Africa. They were on the side of the apartheid forces. But once a new dispensation was obtained, they are socially dislocated. No one seems to be on their side because they are a minority. These are people who face day-to-day challenges, alcoholism or drug abuse generally. Their plight is as deep as any plight anywhere.
They long for recognition as valuable human beings rather than servants or depending on handouts. And we'd like to welcome you all here this morning. Letlapa is going to lead us in an introduction.
Today, I'm not here as a PAC. I take off PAC cap and I put it here. I'm here as Lindy Fourie Foundation person. I'm going to learn a lot from you and from your stories.
So we've broken the group up and we've asked them, what do they have to forgive? So we've asked them to sit and look inside their hearts and to ponder on that.
What type of platform do you want to see? You want to live in?
And some profound things have come to light. One said that he thought it's time he forgave his dark side, that he has a dark side, that it's time for him to forgive it and let it go. So each of them worked individually on what they felt they had to forgive, their families, their community, the alcoholism. And once we finished that, then we looked at the vision. What would you really like? What's in the future? What do your grandchildren want? So now we're creating the vision for the future.
Al weet hulle nooit nie, ons het hulle vergewe nie. Dit gee vrede in ons eie harte.
Ons het gesê both communities work together. Soos Khoi en Khoi hulle moet saamwerk.
Keep the community health through educating them about HIV/AIDS.
Sinne is saam met haar dogter, daar is ongehoorsaamheid saam met haar dogter.
Ons vra vir die government en die steeds government dat hulle vir ons misbruik het en dit is vir ons baie belangrik om te sê dat ons vergewe hulle.
A lot needs to be done. The healing begins with oneself, and I'm happy that what was done today, it was towards helping individuals to heal themselves. But of course, it has to be accompanied by a series of interventions, including government intervention and including even change of legislation.
That's it. Comprendo.
Forgiveness is something that we all long for. If we've offended, we long for forgiveness, to make things right, to make things even again. If there was more sharing and understanding of the deep needs of people who've been marginalized, the world could be a different place. But it takes a spiritual journey as well as an economic and educational journey. The journey has been long and exacting. The forum has opened up for the foundation to become a lot more international. And so the abundance of invitations has come. The South Sudanese and the Egyptians and Vietnam, Cambodia, to Israel and Palestine, and many others.
4 years before I met with Jean, already I had met survivors of self-defense. In the tradition of my people, if someone goes away for a long time, like I did go away for a long time,
everyone has a story to tell, and there are many, many stories of South African women who have lost children in South Africa during apartheid, and it's that sense that it's my story that's being told that's humbling.
I greatly admire her courage of working with someone with my record, especially someone whose militancy she felt in her own home, in her own family. I think the story of forgiveness as initiated by Jean has many layers of meaning. And even for me, I seem to uncover or reach another deeper layer each time the story is related. I feel that a lot of stories out there haven't been told, and people actually are bottling up with feelings and emotions. And I just want to create a release channel for people to tell their stories.
Just imagine if, in our woundedness, separation, alienation, and loneliness, we acknowledge our complicity in the injustices of the past, reach across the divide as individuals and communities, and then hold ourselves and our leaders accountable.
David izwi kwela kyolo dakangela ndasondela lalisitsha lisititili kilo imandilo nkyolo David izwi kwela ndakangela ndasondela lalisitsha lisitizwe lifile nkilo imandilo nkyolo wayembethe ingubo ezimhlophe wayembethe nengubo ezibomvu lalisitsha lisitizwe lifile nkilo imandilo